Hello, it's been such a long time since I've been online and recorded something. I thought I had to very quickly just record something to say, I'm still alive, I'm still doing stuff, and I've just noticed I've come back from walking the dogs in well, what I would call a strong wind. Yeah, forgive me, my hair's a good one today. Anyway, what have I been doing? There's so many things that I've been doing. I finished the Lamont weathered tartan crochet blanket, which is absolutely humongous and it's super heavy, so I'm not carrying it down. It is on my Ravelry with the instructions on how to make it. It turned out to be, well, about 2 meters and 50 by 2 meters and 80, so super XL. In fact, sidewise it fits my super king size bed double, so I folded it over. That's where it is at the moment, so it's on my bed. It's supposed to be getting colder here, so I've put that on the bed with still the summer togs on, but that on top. What else have I done? Oh yes, I finished the Draylon Diamonds jumper pullover. I finished that. It's also on my Ravelry. And, you know, before that, I was doing the Danoon socks. They were finished. The second pair that are the knee highs, I'm still doing. I just have not got round to having enough headspace because there's quite a bit of counting involved and writing down as I go along with the pattern. So that's because I have to do the back and the front counting and have to make sure the pattern on the sides goes right as well. So those are still in the current state. You can see as they are in the Ravelry. And what else have I been doing? Oh yes, this doesn't show up quite as nice. This is what I would call a pink grapefruit colored yarn. It's more pink grapefruit. I don't know why it's showing up so funny. I don't know. It's showing off a lot more orange than it is. This is my first dye experiment, and I think I'm going to make a hat out of this. Although I think it's a pity because it's more than a hat's worth here, so I'm not quite sure what am I going to do with this. It's about 400 meters, 400 and something yards. Don't know quite yet what I'm going to be doing with that. And then I've started another jumper, this time knitting in the round instead of in bits, as in front, back and sleeves. And I got this far. Oops. So I think I am almost ready. I think one more row of one more row of increase, and then I'm going to take the sleeves. That was my marker. My marker's fallen down. Just hang on a minute. Oopsie. There you go. Right. And what am I wearing? Well, you know this is the Raindrops and Pools shawl. Oh, and now I've dropped a whole lot of stitches off here. That's a good one, Maya. Well done. Dropping the stitches whilst dropping the marker. Well done. There you go. Those things happen, don't they? It's one of those days. Yeah, so this is the Drops and Pools. My super long. I have not written this up because this is a free-spirited shawl. I have written some of it up, but I'm not sure. I was going to put this on on a free Ravelry, as in give this pattern away for free. But I'm still not sure. It might be a bit complicated because it is done in 3 sections. Section 1, actually this is section 1, right up to here. This is the section 1 with the most of the pattern. And then this is section 2, and I know the spine is off center. That was planned that way. It's supposed to be the lightning bolt. Section 2, where there's only a little bit of pattern that merges in about a third. And then section 3, which is this little bit, just to merge into section 1 as well. Well, I still do not know whether I'm going to eventually put this on or not, simply because, as I said, it is a little bit complicated. Did I put this on the wrong way around? Doesn't really matter. It's a shawl. I'm still thinking about it. I have written it up about halfway. Having said that, when I knitted this, I didn't really write down every line. I just had a basic idea and the stitch count that I did every now and then. Because it's so free-spirited, I just went along with how I felt rather than what it is supposed to look like. But I might do so anyway, because I think most probably a lot of you out there are good enough, because there's not many hard techniques in here at all, are good enough just to go with the flow, because you can't make a mistake. If you do something different to what is said, well, then it's your own, isn't it? But it does take a lot of yarn, and I think I ended up with, from memory, please don't quote me if it's wrong, of 625 stitches, something like that. So it is very large. I did that on purpose so that it A, covers my elbows, and B, that it fits nicely underneath a coat, and just instead of wrapping it around like a shawl just here and round the neck, I like to have something across my shoulders and a little bit down my back. What else has been happening? I cannot think what else has been happening, except for that a lot of time was spent on that Scottish Lamont crochet blanket. That was super, super long. At the moment, I won't be knitting lots of projects for other people, neither for presents nor for anything else. I would like to get a few jumpers for myself ready, because the reason behind that is I went into my cupboard the other day and I noticed I only have got 2, and the other cardigans I have are either of a material that are really uncomfortable to me, they get too hot, or they're of fleece, which is also no good. I get super itchy after a while from fleece things and so on. So I've decided to make my own. So I'll be doing a couple or 3 of those. And that's the plan. Maybe I'll start doing some mittens as well. I'm thinking of doing a cowl. I have quite a few more ideas I've written down for patterns, but they're taking a back step. I might start those and writing those up come the winter for the next year, basically. I want to give myself a little bit of time out, because it has just been absolutely madness here at home. Madness with things, getting things ready, finishing off things, and the usual thing, the usual stuff, basically. However, enough waffling. I will be attaching to this little thing, this little video and hello video, is a short snap of a video from Christine in the United States on specialist yarns, and I think you'll find that very interesting, as I did. I have knitted with the odd one of those, and it broadens your horizon, and it broadens certainly your experience on knitting and or crochet. So I hope you will enjoy that, and that is all for today. So see you hopefully very soon, or a lot sooner than up to now. Bye bye.
So for today's show, I want to introduce you to some unusual yarns. Now, if you know me, you know that I'm the kind of person who likes to get off the beaten path and do something different. And for yarn, it's always fun for me to locate yarns that you don't see a lot. You don't hear people talking about them a lot. So I went on a mission to find some of the weirdest, strangest yarns I could. Now, some of these were inspired by yarns that I've had in the past, and others are completely new to me. But I think you'll find them interesting and maybe even be motivated to get a hold of some yourself and try out something new. Now, the first yarn I'm going to talk about is made out of paper. This type of yarn is called raffia, and you may have heard of or used raffia ribbon for gift wrapping. And this is basically the same thing, except it's put into ball form and sold for knitting and crocheting. Now, this particular yarn is from the King Cole brand, and I got it from Love Knitting for a little less than $8 for one of these balls. But you can get similar products from places like Joann's and Michael's as well. So this raffia yarn comes in a bunch of different colors. It has 124 yards per ball, and this particular colorway is called Natural. The composition of this yarn is 100% cellulose rayon, and it's a form of paper that is made from the leaves of the raffia palm tree, which grows in Madagascar. It's very lightweight and it's quite soft and smooth. It's also surprisingly strong. I mean, you can rip it, but if you just try to pull it apart, it's very difficult to break. So it's not as fragile and delicate as it might seem. Now, when I was looking into project ideas to make with raffia yarn, it seemed like there were a lot more crochet patterns for it than knitting. But most projects are things like bags, hats, or home decor items like pillow covers. Now, I found this crochet pattern for a small clutch that used raffia yarn, and I decided to translate that pattern into knitting because, well, I don't crochet much, and I wanted to see how it might turn out as a knitted item. Now, the pattern is called the Chain Edge Raffia Crochet Clutch, and the designer is Persia Liu. I'll link to the pattern website in the information box below in case you crochet and are interested in making this pattern. But I will share with you how I knit it. Now, for this project, I used a US size 9 circular needle, which is 5.5 millimeter. I mean, you could do this on a straight needle, but I just prefer to use circulars. You'll first notice that the edge of the flap consists of a gold chain. Now, I bought this gold chain at Joann's, but if I made this again, I would probably get something a little bit heavier. The chain actually puts weight on the flap in order to hold it down. The chain I use does weigh more than the raffia, but it could be a tad bit heavier. Now, I started off with 9 inches of chain, and the resulting clutch ended up being 6 inches wide after it was knit. So if you wanted a wider clutch, you could just add to the length of the chain. but just know that your knitting will shrink in and the finished product will be a little bit more narrow. Now, I attached the raffia to the chain by knitting into each link of the chain like it was a knit stitch. So I made a slip knot and placed it on the needle. I then inserted that same needle through the first link of the chain, wrapped the raffia yarn around the needle, and pulled it back through just like I would make a knit stitch. And then I inserted the needle through the next chain link, wrapped it, and pulled it back through, and so on until I reached the end of the chain. And now the chain is completely attached and forms the cast-on edge of your knitting. So then I simply knit stockinette stitch for 12 inches and then bound off, and that made a rectangle. I wove in the ends. Now, to make the clutch out of that rectangle, I folded the bound off edge up about 3 inches and then used an easy whip stitch to sew the edges and hold them together. And then the flap with the chain just folds over on top. Now, this little clutch is the perfect size for my cell phone. I think it is really cute, and you can see how the raffia looks knit up. As I said, the raffia is surprisingly strong, so the clutch is pretty sturdy. It does feel textured, but not scratchy or uncomfortable at all. The raffia was easy to knit with. Like I said, I used a US size 9 or a 5.5 millimeter needle. I used a metal needle, so the raffia yarn easily slid right over the needle. I had no problems with that. I would recommend, though, that you knit loosely. The raffia, it's paper, so it doesn't have any elasticity whatsoever. And if your stitches sit very tightly on the needles, you'll have a hard time inserting the other needle to make a knit stitch on the next row. So just be aware of that lack of elasticity. So yeah, if you're looking for something different and interesting to try out, you might really enjoy testing out this paper yarn made from raffia. The next interesting yarn I'm going to introduce to you is this yarn that is made out of cork. That's right, you heard me right, it's made from cork. Now, when I saw this cork yarn online, I was so intrigued and I knew I had to get a hold of some. This is the brand Rosario's 4, and it is made in Portugal, which is where most cork comes from. Cork is extracted from the bark of the cork tree, and these trees can live to be 350 years old, and they're the only tree whose bark regenerates itself after each harvest. It takes 20 to 25 years before the first cork can be harvested, and then it takes 9 years for the bark to grow back. The cork harvest is a very delicate process that requires high skill because it is an entirely manual operation. No one has yet been able to come up with a machine that can successfully harvest cork. You have to use a particular type of axe to carefully peel off the bark without damaging the tree, and only about half the tree's bark is peeled off during harvest. A single cork tree produces several hundred pounds of cork at each harvest. And like I said, most cork originates in Portugal. The rest comes from Spain, Italy, Morocco, Tunisia, and Algeria. So, cork yarn. This is really interesting and lovely. The yarn has a tape structure, so it's flat and wide. The width is just a little over 1/8 of an inch, and this yarn is actually not 100% cork. It would probably be too crumbly if it were 100% cork. You know, think of those squares of cork board that you can hang up on your wall. Those are often around 1/4 of an inch thick, and if you bend them, they just crumble and break. So obviously something like that wouldn't work for yarn. So instead, this yarn is a blend of 56% cork, 22% cotton, and 22% polyester. Now, it doesn't feel like anything I've knit with before. It sort of feels like the paper yarn, but it's a lot more stiff. Overall, it's flexible, smooth, and pleasant to the touch, but surprisingly, it doesn't seem to be as strong as the raffia yarn. You can easily break it just by pulling it apart. So for that reason, I probably wouldn't make something like a bag or a tote out of it because it might break if you put like a bunch of fruit in it or something heavy. Now these skeins have 48 yards of cork yarn and 25 grams. So they're very lightweight. Now I was wondering, what do you make with cork yarn? So I did a little searching and there really aren't a lot of ideas out there, but on Etsy I saw that people had made tea cozies, coasters, and trivets. Cork has excellent insulation properties, so it makes sense to use it for keeping things warm or protecting your tabletop from heat damage. But I wondered about one thing with this yarn, and that is the polyester content. I was worried that using it for something like a trivet where you set something hot on it, if it would melt because of the polyester. So I just did a little burn test. I took a piece of the cork yarn and placed it in a flame to see whether it would burn or melt. And as you can see, it definitely burned. It did not melt. So even though this yarn is 22% polyester, it doesn't melt, and it should be fine to use as a trivet or a tea cozy. Now I knit up this swatch of cork yarn just to see what it was like. For this, I used a US size 11 needle, which is 8 millimeters. And I just made this little swatch that I thought I could use for a coaster. The swatch feels very textured, but it's not scratchy at all. It would work fine to set a mug of coffee on. The cork yarn was interesting to work with. Again, I would say that you want to avoid knitting tightly because the cork yarn doesn't have any spring or any elasticity in it. Keeping your stitches loose will allow you to insert the needle to make the next row of stitches. Now I again used metal needles and the cork yarn was very slick on them. So kind of like the paper yarn, with the cork yarn, you want to be careful that your stitches don't just all slide right off. So yeah, it was an interesting experience knitting with the cork yarn. Once again, if you're looking for something unusual and different, you'd probably enjoy this. Now, I couldn't find any place this yarn was available in the US, but I will include a link to the Etsy shop where I ordered mine, which is in Denmark, and I paid around $13 per skein, but the shipping was not very expensive and it was fast. My package arrived probably within a week. For our next unique yarn, think about this. How would you like knitting with stainless steel? Well, this yarn isn't 100% stainless steel, but it is 31% stainless steel, and the rest of the blend is silk. Can you imagine stainless steel and silk combined? Well, it's actually quite soft, but it has this distinctive characteristic. It has really good memory, the tendency to stay in any shape that you put it in. So it's not super drapey like plain silk, but it's also not completely stiff like stainless steel. It's a very happy medium. Now this yarn is by Habu Textiles, a Japanese company. This cone is 311 yards in only 1/2 ounce or 14 grams. And you can see that it's a very fine lace weight yarn. The price is around $11 or $12 for a cone like this. And according to the manufacturer's website, this yarn was originally used as industrial yarn to create oil filters. The core is stainless steel and silk is wrapped around that core. And that's how they get the soft feel, yet the memory where the yarn stays in the shape you put it until you straighten it out again. They recommend knitting with 2 strands at a time. Now, when I looked on Ravelry for this yarn, I found that people have made all kinds of gorgeous projects with it. There are delicate scarves, lacy shawls, and beautiful sweaters. People have also made jewelry out of it, like these pretty earrings. I haven't gotten a chance to knit with this yarn yet, but one idea I have is to make one of my favorite knitted necklaces with it. I've made several of these Maya necklaces. It is a pattern by Shayna Billow, and the pattern is $5 and you can get it as a Ravelry download. I usually make these out of cotton yarn, and I've given several of them away as gifts. But when I saw this yarn made out of stainless steel, the first thing I thought is, wouldn't it make a gorgeous beaded Maya necklace? Now, I think holding this yarn double would create a beautiful, lacy piece that would feel soft and smooth on the skin from the silk, yet it would hold its shape because of the stainless steel core. So that's my plan to knit with this stainless steel silk yarn to experiment with some knitted jewelry. Next, I have another interesting yarn to tell you about, and this one is from the same company as the last one I just told you about. That is Habu Textiles. And it's similar because it's made out of another metal, and that is copper. Now this one is a blend of 33% copper and 67% bamboo. So once again, we have that juxtaposition of softness and firmness. The yardage for this yarn is exactly the same as the last one I just talked about. It's 311 yards in half an ounce or 14 grams. And again, it's a super fine lace weight yarn, and it costs about $13 for this size of a cone. Now, just on this cone, the yarn feels less squishy to me than on the last yarn that I talked about out of silk and stainless steel. The construction is the same though. It's a fine copper wire wrapped with bamboo. This copper bamboo yarn is definitely drapier than the stainless steel yarn. It does have some of the memory of stainless steel, but not nearly as much. Now, I looked on Ravelry to see what people have been making with this yarn, and the projects generally look very similar to those in the stainless steel silk yarn that I just talked about, except that almost all of these projects involves carrying the copper bamboo yarn along with another yarn. But still, the results are stunning. Look at these. Scarves, shawls, sweaters, hats, beautiful leaf earrings, and a unique project that really caught my eye were these crocheted jewelry dishes. Just beautiful. On a lot of these projects, you can see the sheen, probably partly from the bamboo, but partly from the copper as well. Now, I haven't knit with this bamboo yarn myself, but I do have 2 cones of it, and I'm very excited to try it out in making something spectacular. All right, next up is a very elegant, sophisticated yarn that is made with another metal, and that is silver. This is silver spun yarn by the Feel Good Yarn Company. It's not 100% silver, of course. In fact, the actual silver content is only 5%, and most of the blend is combed cotton with 87%. It also has 5% nylon and 3% spandex. And even that little bit of spandex makes it nice and stretchy. Look at this. I love that. As you can imagine, it would be extremely expensive to include a high silver content. In fact, this yarn is already fairly pricey, with this skein of sock yarn running $42. It's really beautiful yarn though. The texture is soft and fuzzy, with the combed cotton strongly contributing to its texture. It's squishy and kind of velvety and would definitely be nice to wear around the head, like for a hat or a scarf. Now, the tag says that the silver is permanently adhered to the yarn so it won't wash out, and the care instructions do say to hand wash and lay flat to dry. Now, the silver in this yarn actually gives it some very cool properties. Silver is known to be antibacterial, and there's a lot of research backing that up. So socks made with this yarn should keep your feet smelling fresh. Probably my favorite thing about this yarn, though, is that silver has excellent conductive properties. This means that you can wear mittens or gloves made out of this yarn and still be able to use your cell phone or touch computer screen. Very nifty. Now, the silver spun yarns are all naturally dyed, which means that the dyes come from plants and other natural sources. The colorway that I have is called Cloudburst, which is a lovely medium gray. Now I've also already covered some ideas for projects. This yarn would be great for socks, hats, gloves, or scarves. On Ravelry, a lot of people have posted fingerless mitts that they made out of silver spun. There was even this torso tube that caught my eye. It's beautiful and kind of like a comforting girdle. So I don't know, I'll probably just end up making some socks with it. So that is silver spun yarn. And now for our last unusual yarn, we're transitioning from elegant and sophisticated yarn with precious metal in it to something completely fun and a little silly. Do you remember in the 1980s, the jelly shoes that used to be in style? And apparently they're coming back and people are wearing them again today. Well, those shoes were made out of PVC plastic, and well, there's yarn made out of that same material. So this is jelly yarn from the Yummy Yarns company. I just have a small sample of 10 yards here, but you can order balls of this vinyl yarn in a wide variety of colors and finishes, including translucent, metallic, clear, and even glow in the dark. It comes in different weights. It comes in super fine, fine, and bulky. The cost varies from around $6 to $8, and the amount of yarn in each ball varies depending on the weight of the yarn you choose. Now, this yarn is very stretchy and rubbery. It is round. It is not a flat tape. I knit up a swatch on a US size 6 needle, which is 4.25 millimeters. This is a swatch that I made from 10 yards of jelly yarn. It was actually quite interesting to knit with. Now, the company does recommend using metal needles and coating them with lotion or vinyl protectant, which they send out with every order. If you don't lubricate the needles, the vinyl yarn will stick to the needles and be very difficult to knit with. Now, I tried several different lotions, but what worked best for me was this lanolin lip balm. Now, I looked on Ravelry to see if it was even listed there, and actually it is. And there are over 100 projects knit with it. So I was looking to see what people knit with it, and there are some really nice ones. I mean, I'm going into this thinking this is kind of a silly novelty yarn, and it kind of is, but you can use it to make really neat things. Now, some of the projects included a bowl, a soap dish, a beach bag, a Halloween pumpkin, a bracelet, and look at this gorgeous coral reef that somebody knit out of this jelly yarn. Isn't that amazing? So yeah, there's a lot of useful as well as artistic items that you could make out of jelly yarn. So I hope you will try it out if you are in the mood for something unique and different to work with. And that concludes my overview of 6 strange yet intriguing yarns. Now today I told you about yarns that were made from paper, cork, stainless steel, copper, silver, and vinyl.